You know that feeling? You're just bombarded with leadership advice, and while it often paints this picture of the heroic individual, single-handedly steering the ship.
Right, the lone genius model.
Exactly, but what if that's like only one part of the story?
That's exactly where our deep dive takes us today. We're looking at a different perspective on leadership. It's one championed by Edgar H. Schein and Peter A. Schein in their book, Humble Leadership.
Humble leadership. Okay.
uh,
It might sound a little maybe out of sync with our driven, results-oriented culture sometimes, but this isn't about being weak or, uncertain, is it?
No, not at all. The core insight here really is that leadership is fundamentally a relationship. It's not a solo performance. The Shines argue that true leadership strength actually comes from building that relationship on a bedrock of openness and trust. It's a shared energy that really fuels progress.
Okay, so we've got some really insightful excerpts from their book as our source today. Our mission, then, is to kind of cut through the noise and understand the essence of humble leadership and, well, how it contrasts with those more traditional, maybe individualistic views.
Precisely. We'll be drilling down into the core principles, exploring their framework for understanding different types of workplace relationships, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
And examining some real-world examples of how this leadership style plays out, for better or sometimes for worse.
Okay, let's unpack this then. What is the core of humble leadership? Because it definitely feels like a departure from the superhero leader we so often hear about.
It is. It's quite a significant shift, actually. The Shines directly contrast it with those hero-centric ideas. So instead of focusing on individual traits or some, magic formula,
Right.
they keep bringing us back to leadership as a relationship, one built on openness and trust. This foundation, they argue, is just absolutely vital for sparking innovation and enabling real growth. The key insight is really ditch the know-it-all act. You have to actively seek out what you don't know. And that shift in mindset, well, it can unlock so much hidden knowledge.
That makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, if people are hesitant to share what they know or maybe voice new ideas, you're really limiting yourself to just the existing knowledge base.
Exactly right. And they introduce this important idea of organizations as socio-technical systems.
Socio-technical systems.
Yeah, think about it. Every organization is a mix, right? You've got the technical side, the data, the metrics, the processes, and then you've got the social side, the human interactions, the collaborations, the culture that gets context. And these two, they're basically inseparable.
So we're talking about needing to balance the data on our spreadsheets with really understanding what's happening on the ground with our teams.
Yes, absolutely. But the risk, as the Shines highlight, is that we tend to overemphasize the technical side.
Oh, is that?
Well, it's easy, isn't it? We get caught up in the numbers because they feel concrete, measurable.
Right, tangible.
Exactly. But if we focus too much on just that technical efficiency, we can easily overlook the social context, the informal networks, and miss crucial information held by other people within the organization.
So we could be hitting all the targets on paper, but completely missing a critical piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Just because we haven't created an atmosphere where people feel comfortable speaking up.
Precisely. And humble leadership isn't saying efficiency is bad, not at all.
Okay.
But it calls for a reevaluation of our focus. It's about looking beyond just, achieving those targets and recognizing that our colleagues often have vital insights that the metrics simply don't capture.
Like what?
Oh, shifts in the market, unexpected problems popping up, maybe just a better, more effective way to do something that only they see from their perspective.
Here's where it gets really interesting, I think. They introduce this idea of situational humility. What's the core idea behind that?
Yeah, situational humility. It's a very specific and critical skill, actually. It's about being truly open to understanding all aspects of a situation. And this involves, well, 3 key things. First, acknowledging uncertainty and staying genuinely curious, like really curious.
Not just pretending.
No. Second, being deliberately open to what others know or what they've experienced. And third, being aware of our own unconscious biases, the things that can cloud our judgment without us even realizing it.
So it's about consciously admitting, okay, I don't have all the answers, and then actively seeking out those different viewpoints.
Exactly. And the Shines really stress this. It isn't just for the top executives, the CEOs.
Right.
Situational humility is valuable at every single level. Anyone, literally anyone, might have a unique perspective simply because of their position, their role, or even just their approach. And being able to share that insight and also incorporating what others know, well, that can empower anyone to drive positive change.
That's actually a really empowering thought, isn't it? That leadership isn't just a title you hold. It's more like a mindset of openness you practice.
Absolutely. The Shines see humble leadership as, well, pretty essential for navigating today's complex, often volatile world.
Yeah.
It requires building those personal connections, those relationships that foster openness and trust. It's really about embracing the fact that no single individual has all the answers.
Which can be hard.
Oh, definitely. But it's about actively encouraging others to contribute ideas and, importantly, identify potential blind spots or pitfalls you might not see.
Okay, so the foundation is relationships built on openness and trust. And that's fueled by this situational humility.
Oh, man.
Now let's talk about these levels of relationship. It sounds like a more detailed way of thinking about our connections at work than just, good or bad.
Precisely. Yeah, the Giants felt we needed a more nuanced way to understand our interactions. So they define a relationship simply as a set of mutual expectations built up from past interactions.
Okay.
A good relationship then becomes one where we can, confidently anticipate how the other person will react.
Predictability.
Yeah, predictability and trust.
Mm-hmm.
And where we share a common goal with that interpersonal trust.
So it's about a sense of, predictability and a shared understanding of what we're actually working towards together.
Yes, and that sense of expected behavior is a really key part of trust. Now, they outline 4 main levels. Let's start at the bottom with level -1, negative relationships. They call it antipathy.
Ooh, okay. Negative.
Yeah, characterized by things like exploitation, dominance. Think of, sweatshops or maybe managers who view employees as just disposable cogs.
Right.
The interesting point they make here, though, is that in very specific kind of bounded situations with a clear power imbalance, like, say, military basic training, this level can sometimes be neutral or even sort of functional in the short term.
Functional negativity, that seems counterintuitive.
It does, right.
Yeah.
But it's due to a shared understanding of necessity, maybe, and the potential for bonding later on. But the Shines definitely question if such exploitative relationships are truly beneficial long-term, especially in fields where well-being matters.
Makes sense. What's next?
Next up is level 1, transactional relationships, or apathy.
Apathy.
Yeah, the minimum expectation here is simply acknowledging each other as human beings, but the interaction is often dispassionate, distant, impersonal.
Okay.
These are based on roles rather than individuals. Think about interactions with, strangers, casual acquaintances, or maybe colleagues in very formal settings, service providers.
Like the coffee shop example again.
Exactly. The limitation here is the psychological distance. And it can lead to frustration with bureaucracy, that kind of thing.
Right.
There's usually an expectation of truthfulness, but also, interestingly, an acceptance of withholding certain information maybe to avoid harm or disadvantage. It's a bit caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. And there can be a darker side, too, like active deception, especially in really competitive, zero-sum environments driven by short-term thinking.
Okay, so level 1 is functional, role-based, but pretty distant. What's the next level up?
Next, we get to level 2. Whole person relationships. Empathy.
Empathy. Okay, that sounds better.
It is. This is where it gets much more collaborative. Now, the paradox they point out is that we often have this level with friends and family, right? But we might actually avoid it at work.
Right, discomfort.
Yeah, discomfort, or maybe feeling it's not rewarded or it takes too much effort. But here's the thing. The more complex the work, the more vital level 2 becomes.
Yeah.
It involves things like psychological safety, which we hear a lot about,
Yeah.
and what they call personalized relationships. Now, this doesn't mean deep personal intimacy necessarily.
Okay.
It means knowing each other well enough as whole people, beyond just our roles, to have open, trusting collaboration around shared goals. It's really about seeing the person behind the job title.
So it's about building a more genuine connection and understanding with colleagues, knowing a bit more about them.
Exactly. And this leads to deeper trust, more honest information sharing, and crucially, avoiding undermining each other. It's a mutual process. You reveal a bit, they accept. They reveal a bit, you accept.
Give and take.
Yeah, reciprocation. And this directly links to employee engagement. You engage with people, not just roles, right?
Makes sense.
But level 2 doesn't just magically happen from level 1. It requires real intention and effort from both sides.
Okay, that's key. And the final level is level 3. Intimate relationships. Compassion. Now, this sounds like it might blur professional lines a bit too much.
Well, yeah, it generally is assumed to be avoided in organizational life,
Why is that?
mainly due to concerns about things like fraternization, nepotism, favoritism,
Right,
how that might impact productivity and fairness.
right.
These are the deeply emotional relationships with total mutual commitment, think lovers, married couples. However, the Shines do acknowledge that the boundaries between level 2 and level 3 can be kind of situational and dynamic, influenced by norms and personal boundaries.
Okay.
They even mention a kind of level 2.5,
New point.
yeah, something beyond level 2 with maybe some elements of compassion and really intense commitment. They suggest this might be relevant for certain high-performance teams. But fundamentally, the key difference between level 1 and level 2 is that shift from apathy to empathy, where you start putting aside pure self-interest for mutual benefit and shared action.
This framework really clarifies the different kinds of interactions we have, doesn't it? It gives
Yeah.
you a language for it. Now, let's look at some real-world examples.
Mm.
The first one you mentioned is Lee Kuan Yew and the creation of Singapore. He's not typically the first person you think of as humble, right?
You're absolutely right. His methods were often seen as autocratic, but the Shines analyze his leadership through this humble leadership lens.
So,
Well, they point out he built strong level 2 relationships with key colleagues very early on during their education. And while his methods later were often quite draconian and, yes, criticized for suppressing dissent,
yeah.
they argue these actions were often justified, at least in his view and many others, by his unwavering commitment to delivering tangible benefits, jobs, housing, a future for Singaporeans.
Mhm.
So the key takeaway they draw from Lee Kuan Yew is that initial situational humility and that early focus on building those foundational relationships can actually drive large-scale success, even if some later actions might appear less humble on the surface.
So it's about the underlying intent, maybe, and those initial relationships that were built. Okay, the next example is Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC, under Ken Olson. This sounds more like a story of initial success that, well, eventually faltered.
Exactly. A classic case, really. Olson initially fostered an unusual amount of freedom for his engineers. He encouraged debate, which built cohesion, but also internal arguments, especially on product strategy.
Right.
And Ken's style, initially, was to let them debate, and then he'd intervene to support them, communicating trust. There's a great quote from him. "First of all, I'm not that smart. I also learned once when I made a decision and started to walk down the road. I discovered that there was no one behind me."
That speaks volumes.
It really does. It shows that early situational humility.
Yeah.
He emphasized market validation, personal commitment to truth, openness. He realized implementation required these mutual helping relationships. Level 2 built on openness and trust, and that led to high employee engagement initially.
But something went wrong.
Yeah. As DEC grew much larger, Olson resisted creating formal divisions. He failed to adapt that situational humility to the larger scale. This led to intense intellectual rivalry between groups, silos formed, trust eroded. Those vital level 2 relationships started to deteriorate.
And the consequences.
Well, products were late, resources got depleted, lots of finger pointing, openness declined. Ken himself was eventually sidelined, and DEC was ultimately sold off.
Wow.
So the lessons from DC are pretty stark. A founder can build a hugely successful organization with humble leadership initially, but empathy and those level 2 bonds can be lost as an organization grows, especially if intergroup competition replaces situational humility. Managing those intergroup fights becomes critical.
So the initial empathy and openness just weren't sustained as the company scaled and faced that internal competition. Okay. The next case study is about reforming a medical center, PNHC, under a leader named Green. This sounds like a more deliberate effort to build empathy across the board.
It really was. Green recognized that healthcare requires incredibly high coordination and, crucially, patient involvement. They call it co-production of health.
Co-production. Interesting.
Yeah, and he understood the importance of having a single overarching change methodology that senior leaders really understood and endorsed. The focus wasn't on imposing change from the top down.
No.
No, it was on enabling new and better ways to emerge from collaboration. So he'd invite department leaders to propose changes and then engage the staff who would be impacted in workshops specifically designed to build those level 2 relationships.
Can you give an example?
Sure, redesigning the cancer center. They focused on patient comfort and effectiveness, but it required collaborating with and actually convincing the dermatology department to get on board.
Right. Breaking down silos.
Exactly. They overhauled lots of operations, the ER, primary care, wards, all using these collaborative approaches. They even implemented a patient safety alert system inspired by Toyota's production system, which naturally fostered closer relationships. And there was a real culture of openness around errors, diagnostic errors, treatment errors. The focus was on systemic causes, not blaming individuals.
That's huge in healthcare. Psychological safety again.
Absolutely critical.
Yeah.
And they successfully adapted to major insurance changes by shifting roles based on data and collaborative problem solving. What emerged was a genuine level 2 socio-technical culture. They even started routinely sharing success stories and created an institute to teach these methods.
Oh, that sounds like a real transformation.
It was. So the key takeaways from PNHC are: 1, it is possible to build empathy throughout a large, complex system. 2, consistent situational humility from the CEO can create a new kind of social compact and really foster those level 2 relationships. And 3, involving the board helped ensure the stability of these new systems.
These examples really show the impact of humble leadership in such different contexts. Now, let's look specifically at how it applies to transforming organizations, even in places you might not expect, like the military.
Right, the military, often seen as the epitome of command and control, where obedience is paramount.
Exactly.
But even there, things are evolving. There's a growing emphasis on teamwork, cross-hierarchical cooperation, and empowering people on the ground to make decisions. Hierarchical relationships can range all the way from level -1 up to level 3, but for complex tasks and high-stakes situations, that level 2 trust and openness become absolutely crucial.
So Captain Marquet turning the ship around. Tell us about that.
Yeah, Captain David Marquet, who took command of the USS Santa Fe, which was performing very poorly. He built relationships right away, primarily by asking questions and showing genuine curiosity, not pretending he knew everything.
Situational humility again.
Yeah, textbook example. He focused specifically on building level 2 relationships with the influential chief petty officers, the CPOs. He met with them, asked about their perspectives, what they wanted to improve. He asked them directly, "Are you happy with things as they are, or would you like to see a better way?"
Powerful question.
Very. And he empowered his officers by asking them what procedures they wanted to change. He implemented the famous "I intend to" announcement before taking action.
What was the purpose of that?
It invited support, validation, and crucially, potential correction from others before committing to a course of action. It fostered shared responsibility.
Smart.
He also created personalized relationships in simple ways, like mandating the use of names when sailors boarded the ship. "Welcome aboard, Seaman Jones," not just "welcome aboard."
Malay B sail, big impact.
And he held an all-hands meeting where he deliberately broke rank order seating to ensure all sailors heard the message that they mattered, their input was valued.
So what's the lesson there?
The key takeaway from Marquet is that building readiness for change takes patience, persistence, and a willingness to challenge conventions. Even in the most hierarchical organizations, fostering openness and valuing input from all levels is absolutely crucial for success.
It really is about fostering that sense of shared ownership and responsibility, isn't it?
Exactly. And there are other examples too. They mention a chemical conglomerate, Multi, that handled layoffs humanely.
How so?
Immediate supervisors delivered the news, they offered various support options, they treated former employees as whole people, and they took pride in being viewed positively in the community afterward, especially compared to a competitor's very impersonal process. The lesson there is that personizing, level 2 thinking, is critical even in really difficult situations to maintain trust and a sense of fairness.
Maintaining dignity.
Precisely. And another one, Alpha Company, a troubled public utility. They needed to repair their image, reduce accidents, environmental, and employee.
How did humble leadership help?
They created an environmental quality review board, the EQRB, with outside experts to drive change. This board acted as a humble leadership catalyst, focusing explicitly on building openness and trust within the group itself first.
Interesting approach.
Yeah, lots of meetings just to foster personal connections within the Environment, Health, and Safety Committee. They evolved from just being transactional representatives of their departments to becoming a truly collaborative team. They involved union members more deeply, had them present findings directly to executives.
Breaking down barriers again?
Constantly. Monthly lunch meetings across divisions, functions, hierarchies, presenting innovations. They address a dysfunctional safety timeout program by shifting focus from just numbers to actual safety, empowering employees.
What were the lessons from Alpha?
Several. Building level 2 trust in a diverse group leads to innovative solutions. You need deliberate efforts to foster communication and active listening across silos. Establishing mutual empathy and psychological safety encourages openness across the hierarchy. And replacing those level 1 transactional relationships with level 2 fosters a common organizational identity. External facilitation can also be really crucial initially.
So across all these examples, even in seemingly rigid structures or during tough times, prioritizing those level 2 relationships seems to be the key driver of positive change and transformation.
That's the core argument, yes.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly and talk about how organizational culture itself plays a role. Humble leadership and these relationships don't exist in a vacuum, do they?
No, absolutely not. They're heavily influenced by the surrounding culture, while humble leadership principles and level 2 interactions can technically occur anywhere in an organization. They can definitely be blocked or undermined by established conventions and norms. There's often this gravitational pullback towards level 1 behaviors, especially if the organization still defaults to that lone hero or linear machine model of how things should work.
The status quo is powerful.
It really is. Although, interestingly, messy, complex problems, or even just the need for survival, can sometimes compel leaders towards humble leadership, even if it wasn't their natural inclination.
Necessity being the mother of invention, or humility.
Something like that. To understand this better, the Shines provide a useful model of organizational culture. They break it down into layers.
Layers.
Yeah, you've got the visible stuff, the structure, artifacts like what you see, hear, feel, office layout, dress code, ceremonies. Then the espoused values, what insiders say is important, the official mission statement. And then the deepest layer, underlying assumptions, the core, historical, often non-negotiable beliefs about how the world works.
Okay, structure, values, assumptions.
Right. And then there's the practice side, how things actually get done. This includes the technical culture, strategy, mission, objectives, organizational design, and the social culture.
Yeah.
The norms around communication, relationships, influence networks, social patterns.
Technical and social practices.
Exactly. And both of these are influenced by the macro culture. Global, national, local trends, occupational norms, technology shifts, socio-political movements.
Wow, okay, so it's this complex interplay of what we see, what we say, what we deeply believe, how we actually work technically and socially, and all the external forces acting on us.
You got it. It's dynamic. The practice of the structure and the structure of the practice, as they put it. Macro trends, like the massive shift to remote work during the pandemic, obviously have a huge impact on both technical and social cultures within companies.
Right.
Think of it like waves on a beach. Culture change initiatives face headwinds resistance and hopefully catch some tailwind support. And leadership actions, along with these macro cultural shifts, determine whether you get mostly headwinds or tailwinds.
That's a helpful metaphor. So how can an entrenched hierarchy, for example, act as a headwind, a barrier to these level 2 relationships we've been talking about?
Yeah, they have a story about a manager named Brian that illustrates this perfectly.
What happened?
Brian, a frontline manager, formed really good, open, trusting level 2 relationships with his experienced, unionized line workers. They shared information freely.
Okay.
But his relationship with his own boss was very different. It was professionally distant, competitive, very level 1. His boss was solely focused on production efficiency metrics and tended to blame the workers for machine breakdowns, rather than investigating if the machinery itself was faulty, which it often was.
So Brian knew the real problem.
Yes, but he felt completely unable to communicate this effectively up the chain to his boss because that relationship lacked trust and openness. There were no role models for humble leadership higher up in that particular part of the organization.
And the outcome.
Brian eventually quit. It highlights the cost of prioritizing technical conventions, hitting the numbers at all costs over the social culture and the well-being and insights of employees.
So the key takeaway there is that different organizational layers can genuinely have conflicting priorities and intentions, creating really strong headwinds that can block positive change, even if it's happening lower down.
Exactly. It shows the importance of having alignment and consistent values, or at least understanding, throughout an organization.
What about the flip side? What happens when a company tries to be transparent but maybe doesn't have the underlying trust? The example of business communication systems, BCS, sounds like a cautionary tale.
It really is. BCS was founded by engineers who genuinely valued fairness and transparency. They implemented this metrics-based management system with data publicly displayed everywhere.
Okay, radical transparency.
Yeah. And initially, the social culture was quite fluid and collaborative, lots of level 2 relationships. But then suddenly, one of the founders was terminated. And the way it was handled, although arguably transparent in terms of the decision being clear, was seen by many as a huge betrayal of trust and the collaborative culture they thought they had. It introduced fear
Why fear?
because the move felt overtly transactional, level 1. It prioritized decisive action over a more relational, level 2 approach that might have involved more discussion or different solutions. The result was that the social culture became much less fluid, less open, less trusting. People clammed up,
And the company.
eventually sold at a loss and downsized.
Wow. So the lessons from BCS.
A few big ones. First, transparency without underlying trust can actually be weaponized or perceived as threatening.
Right.
Second, true openness isn't just passive visibility of metrics. It involves active sharing, yes, but also active listening, understanding, and responding. It's a two-way street. And third, sometimes those deep underlying assumptions, perhaps about individualism or the necessity of purely transactional relationships in business, can prevent the building or sustaining of level 2 relationships, even if the company espouses collaboration. Fear-driven management just undermines long-term resilience and adaptability.
So genuine openness requires more than just showing the numbers. You absolutely need that foundation of trust and psychological safety. It seems like a common pattern emerges where conventional values often prioritize operational efficiency and metric-based leadership over that deeper collaborative effectiveness, even when companies say they want an open social culture.
That's a very common tension, yes. Creating change is rarely a simple, linear process. The challenge for humble leadership is identifying which aspects of the existing technical culture are potential tailwinds, helping you move forward, and which are headwinds, holding you back from achieving something new and better.
And it requires constant effort.
Continuous culture change leadership? Absolutely. And it thrives best in organizations that already have or are actively building psychological safety, openness, and trust, those level 2 relationships we keep coming back to.
Okay. Now, looking ahead, anticipating the future, how do the Shines see humble leadership evolving, or what challenges lie ahead?
Well, they pose a really interesting question. Do we apply the same rigor to planning for cultural impacts and trends as we do for technological and macroeconomic ones?
Probably not, I guess.
Right. They introduce this idea of metaculture. These are future cultural trends that might impede or conversely catalyze the pursuit of new and better ways of working, including humble leadership.
Like what kind of trends?
Well, think about the impact of digital natives entering the workforce or AI-augmented learners. How will that change information assimilation? Could it create a wider gap with older experts who might be prone to overconfidence?
Interesting point.
Or consider the rapid adaptation to virtual meetings during the pandemic. What are the long-term implications for hybrid work models, for cultural norms around presence, focus, connection? These are big cultural shifts.
Absolutely.
So the core challenge, as they see it, remains balancing technical efficiency and social collaboration. But they note there's often a greater sort of gravitational force pulling us towards the technical side.
The lure of the metrics again.
Exactly. So they argue for shifting our focus. Maybe stop spending all our energy fine-tuning the metrics, and instead invest more deliberately in the social and collaborative processes needed to align the technical, social, and macro cultures.
Is the idea that the technical side might take care of itself more in the future?
To some extent, yeah. With increasing automation and AI, maybe some technical efficiencies will become easier to achieve. The real differentiator, the real leadership challenge, might lie more in mastering the social side.
So understanding that alignment between social and technical culture and anticipating these metaculture impacts that can provide the necessary tailwinds for humble leaders.
That's the idea. And situational humility becomes even more crucial for overcoming conventional thinking traps in this rapidly changing landscape.
It really boils down to needing both present action, building those open, trusting relationships now, and future anticipation.
Yes. And acknowledging the challenges, especially around scaling up or pivoting the social culture alongside technical changes, it's not easy. The fundamental humble leadership design challenge remains. Ensuring you have the right levels of relationship in the right places at the right time for optimal information flow and collaboration.
The right relationships, right place, right time. That sums it up well. To really drive this home, they include an allegory near the end, a startup becoming a bureaucracy. What's the core message there? It sounds familiar.
It's a very relatable cautionary tale. Imagine a two-person garage startup. Great idea. Probably a level 2.5 relationship, right? intense connection and trust.
Yeah.
As they grow, success depends on maintaining high levels of openness and trust those level 2 relationships with new hires. But the warning is against focusing solely on technical metrics during that growth phase.
What gets neglected?
Things like career development, genuine employee engagement, maybe exploring novel organizational designs that support collaboration rather than just hierarchy. And then inevitably, maybe there's a rough patch, workforce reduction happens.
No.
And if handled badly, purely transactionally, it massively damages trust. The allegory basically depicts this downward spiral from compassion and empathy, level 2.52, down to apathy and zero-sum competition, level 1, and maybe eventually even mistrust and antipathy, level -1, as the company bureaucratizes and forgets its roots.
Ouch. But the founders see it.
Yes. In the allegory, the founders recognize this backsliding and believe it can be fixed. It illustrates how bureaucratic behavior, often focused on control and predictability, can displace that essential cooperative foundation of humble leadership.
So what's the fix?
The founders decide they need to reset the organizational self-image. Move away from thinking of it as a well-oiled machine, which implies rigid, predictable parts, and towards seeing it as a shape-shifting, organic, living system.
Living system versus machine.
Yeah. Exactly. Which requires moving away from relying primarily on level 1 transactional relationships and deliberately cultivating those level 2 personalized relationships again.
Harder than starting from scratch, though.
Oh, much harder. But the long-term payoff is potentially huge. The key to a successful living system is its ability to shift resources dynamically based on need, which requires open information flow.
And that requires trust.
Absolutely. Humble leaders in this model need to constantly read the room, the situation, the people to set direction. They practice situational humility, they embrace volatility, and they continually reinforce level 2 relationships to ensure complete information sharing within a flexible, open system.
And the warning.
The warning is clear. Regressing back to level 1 relationships for perceived short-term efficiency will ultimately be less effective, maybe even destructive in the long run, especially if it leads to withholding information or active deceit.
It's a powerful reminder to not lose sight of that human relational foundation, especially as an organization grows or faces pressure. Finally, the book includes some practical, experiential exercises for actually developing humble leadership skills. Can you highlight a couple of those?
Yes, they're quite hands-on. One is called Building the Basic Relationship Map.
Relationship map.
Yeah. The purpose is to visualize your current relationships, work, family, community from this relational level perspective. Level -1, 1 to 2.53. It helps you identify areas where you might want or need to improve connections.
How's it work?
You literally draw it out, a circle for you, circles for people you interact with, lines showing intensity and the relationship level. The emphasis is on mapping relationships with individuals, not just their roles.
Okay.
You can create different maps for different contexts, revisit them, use them to think about leadership goals like, who is missing? Are my current relationships adequate for what we need to do next? It helps you become more mindful, maybe spot unconscious biases, and mobilize your curiosity about others.
That sounds useful. What's another one?
There's the lemon experiment. It's simple but effective.
Lemons.
Yeah. It demonstrates the difference between generic, level 1 observations and detailed, personalized level 2 understanding. Basically, you observe a lemon generically, then you get your lemon, study it closely, introduce it to a partner with details, and then try to find your specific lemon from a pile.
Oh, I see. Generic descriptions aren't enough to pick out the individual.
Exactly. It highlights the need for deeper observation and understanding when dealing with people, not just objects or roles. Then there are exercises focused on conversations, personalizing conversations. This is about practicing moving beyond purely transactional talk. You find colleagues you only know at level 1, and you role-play having a slightly more personal conversation, asking questions, revealing a bit about yourself, like you might have seated next to them on a plane.
Getting beyond the weather and work tasks.
Precisely. They give tips on how to ask appropriate personal questions, how to open up gradually, how to listen for unique details. It's about that mutual learning process. And another related one is deepening a transactional relationship, where you intentionally plan and try to shift a specific level 1 relationship towards level 2, then reflect on how it went.
These sound like very practical ways to actually start applying these concepts, moving beyond just theory.
Absolutely. They emphasize that personalizing is relevant and crucial for effective and, frankly, more enjoyable work life in the future. And one more valuable one is group decision-making process.
Not that about.
It helps groups understand how they make decisions and become aware of common traps. You might do an activity like ranking leadership characteristics and then analyze the process you used. Did someone just announce the decision? Did you vote? Did you reach consensus? They review different methods and highlight pitfalls, like silence doesn't equal agreement, or how status differences can inhibit openness, or how voting can create undermining minorities. It stresses the importance of reading the room, understanding group dynamics, and intervening effectively to ensure psychological safety and good outcomes.
So being aware of the process, not just the outcome.
Exactly. Superior outcomes are much more likely in groups with that synergy that comes from open and trusting level 2 relationships.
These exercises really do offer concrete, actionable steps for our listeners to start exploring humble leadership in their own lives and work. Okay, so to summarize this whole deep dive, wrap it all up for us. What are the key things our listeners should really take away?
Well, I think the central idea, the big one, is that humble leadership, which is really built on strong relationships, openness, and trust, isn't just a nice to have. It's pretty essential for navigating the complexities of today's work environment and crucially for fostering genuine innovation. We've seen how those different levels of relationship from -1 up to 3 really impact organizational dynamics. We've talked about the importance of being situationally humble, admitting you don't know it all, and being curious. And we've looked at how this leadership style plays out in various real-world scenarios, both the successes and, well, the failures too.
And it's really about recognizing that true leadership strength often comes from connection and collaboration, maybe more so than just individual brilliance or authority.
Precisely. That shift towards building and maintaining those level 2 whole person relationships and consciously embracing situational humility. It feels like a fundamental requirement now for long-term growth and adaptability, not just an optional extra.
So for you, the listener, maybe pause and consider your own network, your own relationship map, as the Shine suggests. Is there one relationship currently stuck at that transactional level 1 phase that you could maybe intentionally try to make a bit more personal, a bit more level 2? Or perhaps think about a situation at work or even outside of work, where embracing just a little more situational humility, asking more questions, genuinely seeking out other perspectives could lead to a new and better outcome, as they say.
It's really about starting small, isn't it?
Exactly. Starting small, being intentional, and recognizing the fundamental power of human connection in everything we do.